Welcome. The Leadership Lesson podcast inspires leadership growth in everyone. We have enthralling conversations with top leaders in order to provide you with life-changing lessons. My name is Caleb Nichols. I'm a speaker, a pastor, and a family man. My hope is to inspire spiritual depth and leadership growth in you. I love to sit down with leaders from a variety of fields, hear their personal stories and leadership experiences. This creates the podcast. Enjoy.
All right, we have, welcome to the podcast, everyone. We have Jim Penman here, who's the founder and CEO of Jim's Group. Apparently started with $24 in 1982. That was the year I was born, Jim. So that's exciting. And Jim's Mowing has then become franchised in 1989 and become the biggest franchisor in Australian history, I was reading, which is amazing, Jim. Can you tell us the numbers?
Well, it's a bit hard to tell right now because so many suspended with lockdown, but we're about 4,400 or something like that. Yeah. Mind you, you have to say, to be fair, we might have the biggest numbers, but if you look at the actual turnover and profitability, I would think McDonald's is a bit better.
But it's amazing what it has grown from over all the years. So I actually have a pastor in my church who has just started a Jim's fencing franchise.
Oh, wow, that's a good one. Lots of work. 60% on service. All we could do is more of him. We got one particular guy who just started. He wrote to me in his first 2 months, he's done $70,000 turnover. And he's probably biggest problem, he can't find enough workers. So he's raking it in. Fencing is great.
So why do you get so many leads and why aren't you able to fill them?
Well, basically because we just can't sign enough fences. It seems to be hard to get people to do it. It's a great trade. It's healthy outdoor work. It's very profitable, stacks of work, easy to build a major business. I would say it's a fantastic business to get involved in. And also they tend to get a lot of referrals because what happens is you put up a fence, you get somebody to fence their yard, 3 sides, and then you've got 3 or 4 neighbours all with bad fences. So and one good one. So they tend to go down the street. Yeah.
And what about lawn, Jim? Do you love lawn, or do you get asked that much because it's all started with Jim's Mowing, or have you forgotten about lawn now and you're on to many other things?
No, my heart still bleeds green, as they say. So I actually am off later today to spend some time working on my farm. I'm just working physically outdoors, which is to me is fun. That's what I used to do. I used to do it as a student job because it was that was back in the 70s. Because it was a way of making money and quite good money for a student, and it got me outside and physical exercise and green and trees and grass and stuff. So I like that kind of stuff. Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Nearly half of our franchisees are still mowing. We've got just under 2,000, I think, who are in the mowing division. So the other divisions are actually growing faster, but mowing is still growing and it's going well.
Wow. Right now down the road, there's a Jim's Mowing guy 3 houses down doing my neighbour's lawn. So it is amazing how you see it everywhere. So it's an incredible story. Can you tell us a little bit about how you started and how it got going and what makes you tick, Jim? Why did you get this business going? Why did you turn it into franchising? I'd love to hear a bit of the background.
Well, I'm more the accidental entrepreneur than anything else. I always intended to be an academic to research into understanding the rise and fall of civilizations and this kind of thing. So that was my whole focus. Gardening and then mowing was my student job. But it's really all that happened is, in actual fact, what happened in 1982 was that I got to a stage where it was clear that I had no possibility of an academic career, because to be an academic, because my field was basically history, you have to be focused on one particular area. You have to be the world's expert, say the world of the roses, which isn't difficult, but I mean, that's how they do it. Now, I was interested in not only just not one country at one period of time, but not even one country, and not even I wanted to study multiple countries across the world. And not only that, but looking at cross-cultural anthropology and zoology and genetics and all kinds of things. It just got this So I was wildly unspecialized, and that was just absolutely fatal. There was no possible way I could ever get any kind of academic career. So basically, being pretty well broke at the time and deeply in debt and everything else, I just decided to start mowing lawns full time in 1982. It was kind of, and the idea always was that one day I would have enough money somehow to be able to fund my research institute, which we're currently doing. Actually, I've written the book, which is this one here, which I'm in the process of updating now with recent research. We're spending a couple of $1 million a year on a research program into epigenetics and biochemistry and all kinds of things, which is based on these kinds of ideas. So that was always my goal, not making money for its own sake, but making money so I could do the research, which was what I wanted in the 70s.
So many people would say you've been very successful in making money in order to do what you want to do. So, and I'd love to get into the biohistory maybe a little bit later in our conversation. I find that fascinating as well. So it all started off with the desire to research, and mowing lawns was a means to an end, but it's something that just grew. And as you said, an accidental success. So what do you think really gave Jim's Mowing or Jim's group the success? What was it that you did that was different to others?
Look, a lot of it's got to do with my own personal emotional drivers, which people underestimate in the way they look at these things. First of all, I had no comprehension when I first started that mowing was going to be the thing. I thought it was just something to get on with until I could find something else. And I tried lots of different things. I tried Amway, for example. That wasn't very successful. I tried, I had a mower shop at one stage. I had a computer business. I've had trading exchanges. I've done all kinds of different things. So in a sense, most of the things I've tried have been abysmal failures. I just happen to have worked out quite well at one of them. So it took me a long time, even after the franchise, to figure out that this thing actually had some real legs behind it. So, but that's kind of the thing. But I've always had a very strong obsession with service, with doing things well. Like when I was a mowing contractor, I had a really emotional attitude to wanting to make my customers happy. And I just felt appalled if I would let somebody down. I remember missing out on a couple of clients one time because of a mistake in my diary and just feeling so bad and so guilty. And I would just have a fanatical attitude to making the lawn perfect. I was one of the first contractors in Australia to get a brush cutter because I just wanted the edges to be perfect. And then I just can't understand how anybody can do an edge on a lawnmower job and leave one blade of grass. To me, it's like a gigantic pimple on the face of a beautiful woman. I mean, it's horrible. And so I had this emotional driver. And when I started the franchise, and bear in mind, again, I had no conception of what would happen. I used to have a business building up and selling lawn mowing rounds. And I was just going to keep on with that until something better came along. And then this rival came in, VIP from Adelaide, and they had 250 franchisees. That was giant for me. This was the gorilla in the room. I was petrified. I thought these guys would crush me because they were so big and so well funded, and they had all these logos and nice offices and all kinds of really impressive stuff. So I just basically franchised in self-defense. And somebody asked me at the time when I first started it, what do you think might happen in if you're really successful? And I said, look, I don't know if it's going to work, but if it does work out one day, I might have 100 franchisees. I actually said that at the time. So,
wow.
But I had a vision, Caleb, and this is a really important point about it, that I wanted my franchisees to become raving fans. And I thought, what can I do to make my franchisees successful? How can I make them really love the system and want to stay with it, want to get their friends in it, and want to be a referral system? And so I designed the contract to be really favorable to franchising in a way that no other franchise contract I ever heard of. And I had arguments with lawyers for about 9 months because they could not comprehend this attitude. They said, you're being too nice. You're going to give yourself more power. And I said, no, but if I was a franchisee, I wouldn't want somebody to have that. So I put all kinds of stuff in. It says, absolute right to territory, but you can work where you want. Your fees will be the same regardless of how many workers you put on, same base fee. We cannot take regular clients off you without your consent. stuff like that, really crazy things. And they said to the lawyer said to me, "This is okay, but you're gonna wise up with time." I didn't. I did the opposite actually. Over the time, I put more powers for my franchisees. I give them, for example, the right to change to a different franchisor, the right to vote out the franchisor, the right to veto changes to their own manual. There's nothing in the world like it. And then the way we run it too, the kind of support we tried to give, the way we looked after people, the regular phone calls and stuff. So I just kept on figuring out how can you make your customers into raving fans. And my key customer as a franchisor is my franchisees. And it kind of worked out better than I thought it would. Surprised me.
You've touched on an amazing principle there, Jim, of service, of putting others before yourself, of being a leader and a businessman that actually opens doors for others rather than uses others to make some money or build some power or reputation. And it's amazing that principle is so powerful, but in some ways it's counterintuitive, isn't it?
Well, people who put money first don't tend to make the most money. That's my experience. I've just been finished reading a book by Dave Packard about Hewlett Packard and the way they thought about business and stuff. And it was very different to, the money first kind of thing. Very long term, very focused on the welfare of their staff and their customers. Same with James Dyson, another book called Invention. I've just been listening to on a talking book. It's a wonderful book, and the same kind of idea. I think putting money first is a really terrible idea. See, there's various principles in the way I run a business, which is very much based on the words of Jesus in the Gospels, which is, to me, the core of what I believe in. One crucial thing is Jesus washing his disciples' feet. Now, that really is an amazing story, and far more than we imagine from the current age, because in those days, washing somebody's feet was something that a slave did. It was the lowest, most degrading job. Now, sometimes when you had a really, really high prestigious rabbi, the disciples might wash his feet as a sign of respect. But Jesus washed his disciples' feet. It was totally revolutionary. It turned everything on its head. And that was a staggering thing at the time. And that principle that we serve, that I serve my franchisees, I serve their welfare. Even when I'm annoyed at them and I tell them you've got to give better service to customers, I do it because that's the way you can help your own business to work and everybody else's business to work and everybody to make money. I'm not against you. I'm in favor of you. So even when I'm tough on them, it's for their sake. So, and the other sayings that are very much meaning for me would be the parable of the talents. I believe God gives us certain abilities and we're meant to use them. And the other thing that I really think about a lot is what Jesus said about the wealthy. He said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And I always have that in my mind, that wealth is potentially very corrupting. And it's not something it's there to serve myself. It's there to do the things that he's asked me to do in my life.
Excellent. And so what is your relationship to money? How do you, I assume you're fairly well off. I think you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But so what is your relationship to money in that sense? How do you handle it? How do you not let it, I suppose, overtake you and corrupt you in that way?
Well, the major thing is we live in a fairly, what you might call comfortable middle-class life. I drive a car which probably worth about $5,000, currently splattered with mud because it goes up to my farm. So we have somebody come in cleaning once a week. Basically, I do the washing up and stuff, take out the rubbish, and wife does the laundry. It's really, our children have sort of theoretically know that we're rich, but have absolutely no feeling of it. It's just nothing like what they see on TV about the lives, the mansions and the servants. And I always fly coach in economy class and airplanes. If I hate traveling anyway, but I just don't believe that the wealth is there to be used for personal luxury. I don't think it makes you happy anyway. In fact, the best studies on happiness show that the best way to use money to become happy is the worst way is status, buying expensive clothes and cars and this stuff to make yourself. That's the worst. Experiences are somewhat better, but the best way, according to scientific research, to use money to make yourself happy is to give it away to something that you are personally involved in, which in my case, this is my research project. That makes me happy. Having the latest fancy car wouldn't do anything for me at all.
Excellent. So you really see money as a tool to be used, not something to just make your life a little bit fancier.
Yeah, and I've made it clear to my kids. I've got 10 children, and they're not going to get much. A little bit of help with housing when they want to have a family, just so they're not enough to pay for the kids, but just enough to give them a bit of a leg into the client market. Apart from that, they're on their own, and they're all doing well because they haven't been brought up spoiled rich kids. They're not trust fund kids. They're good. They're with money. They've all got productive careers going. Not the older ones anyway. So.
Yeah, fantastic. I love it. I think you're preaching to the choir here, and especially when you're talking about Jesus washing feet as a pastor, you're definitely talking my language, which is great. Do you go to church somewhere out your way?
Yes, we go to a church called Life Ministry Centre in Churnside Park near us. It's basically related to my kids' school, which is what tends to happen with us.
Oh, okay.
We're together. Yeah, we haven't gone to church much lately because of the lockdowns, but we miss it.
I know it's been horrible, hasn't it? And there's a lot of controversy around that with the lockdowns. I've been getting messages from people in my congregation saying, "Oh, I don't know if we're going to be able to go back to church if we're not vaccinated, Pastor Caleb, and what are we going to do?" And so what's your take on the whole COVID thing and how it relates to people?
Well, I as you may have heard, I'm fairly outspoken. I think the lockdown has been atrocious in terms of knocking sole contractors down, not just my people, but there's tens of thousands across the country, maybe hundreds of thousands, lawnmowers, cleaners and stuff. If you're in a job that doesn't require any form of contact with anybody, including clients, because you can get paid electronically, then why shut them down?
Yeah.
I think what they've done is absolutely shocking, and I've obviously myself heard about that. I think it's just a complete neglect of some of the most vulnerable people in our society. I have to say too, in that sense, my own franchisees are pretty better off than most because they tend to be the elite. They're the ones that are making the most money. One of the things we do tell our franchisees is don't compete on price. Always try to be the most expensive because we've actually got a massive amount of work. We've actually, about 1/3 of our jobs are unserviced because there's so much demand for our services. So you don't need to be cheap. So we charge a lot more than the most independents do. But a lot of independents are very poorly off. And some of my franchisees have been through some very hard times with this too. Some of them don't get government support. And we had one poor lady facing potential eviction, and people were giving her, food vouchers and stuff. And we lent her some money and said, if you get thrown out, you can come and stay at our conference centre. So it was a real suffering and also mental suffering too. So I'm not against lockdowns. I think sometimes closing down mass things, even churches, which I really not happy about, but I recognise the need for that is sensible. But shutting down a mowing contractor or somebody cleaning pools or building fences, it makes no sense. It doesn't control infection, but it causes terrible harm. And that's something like that. And the other thing too, I'm very, very strongly in favour of vaccination. I just think we're pushing. I don't know if you've heard about it. We've got these. If you see on my shirt here, this is a thing called Jim's Jabs, and we're giving away shirts and caps to people, hats to people who can show they're fully vaccinated. And we've given away. Got about 1,000 people lined up to get these things, so that's
fantastic.
Pile them out. So just to try and create this buzz about vaccination. I've actually had my 20-year-old daughter rang me up to say, "Oh, Dad, can I have one of these shirts?" And I said, "Well, you've got to get vaccinated, Sylvia." So she said, "All right, I'll put my first appointment in now." And I said, "Don't worry, I'll keep one back for you, but you've got to be vaccinated."
She didn't want to miss out.
No, that was a great reaction too. So, I mean, we've got to encourage you. We've got to get this 70-80% thing done. So I'm getting a bit of flack, actually. The anti-vaxxers don't like me at all. I get these virulent attacks all the time about how I'm taking away people's freedom of choice and stuff. And I said, I'm not telling anybody to get vaccinated. I'm encouraging it, though, because that's the only way we're going to get back to a normal life. I'm sick of these lockdowns, aren't you?
Yeah.
So let's get vaccinated. Vaccination is done. The really strange thing about it is the anti-vaxxers, they tell me that I'm inconsistent because I'm against the severity of the lockdowns, but I'm also in favour of vaccination. And that's like it's an opposite to them. Well, to me, if you're an anti-vaxxer, you're in favour of lockdowns, because the only way to get out of lockdowns is to get people vaccinated. So when you're saying don't get vaccinated, don't go and get vaccinated and try and persuade everybody, what you're saying is, I love these lockdowns. Let them go on forever. This is fantastic. That's what they're saying, which to me is a little bit contradictory.
What do you think of the Christian world, that church world that we find ourselves in, and the way that a lot of Christians have tagged things like the end times or the mark of the beast or these kinds of things to COVID, lockdowns, vaccinations, the conspiracy theories that have really taken rise during this season? What's your take on all of that?
Well, I'll tell you what Jesus said. He said, we don't know when it's coming. We just don't know. And there's things that Paul wrote to suggest that he thought it was coming very quickly. And this was 2,000 years ago. So he thought it was instantaneous. The fact is, you don't know. But what Jesus said makes good sense to me. He said, be ready. It's going to come. Yep. Don't know when. Be ready. To try and pick the time, to me, is a fool's errand. They've been trying for 2,000 years and nobody's got it right. So what you've got to do is live every day of your life in a way that if Jesus comes back tomorrow, you're ready for it. That's my view.
Yeah, great. And can I ask you a bit more about Jim's group and the journey, the history? How did you, as a leader, what I try to do in this podcast is pull out lessons for people. So how did you as a leader learn along the journey? Was there any moments where you really had to learn new skills? I'm sure it's been quite a journey going from a younger man starting a business to where you are today. What have you learnt along the way?
Well, Caleb, I think you describe my way of learning things as making one colossal blunder and mistake after another. Doing everything wrong and then trying to work out what you've done wrong and trying to fix it. I don't know. I've made so many mistakes, even in the past few years, that it would fit most people's entire lifetime with the mistakes that I've made. Look, there's one very simple approach that I have to business, and that says that you're never good enough. That every day, every single day of my life, and I really mean that with no exaggeration, I'm asking myself the question, how can I do it better? How can I improve? There wouldn't be one day in the past 30 years that I haven't asked myself that question, 30, 40 years, whatever it is. How can I do it better? I'm obsessive about it. Every day I go through all the complaints. Every poor ranked survey, about 1 in 3 of our clients respond to a survey, which has been hugely helpful to us. It's been, I think, the major reason we've been able to improve our customer service so much and get so many more leads lately. I go through every single low-rated survey where there's some sort of comment and look at it, and I mark it down as a complaint or not, and then follow it up and so forth. I do personally with clients that get complained and don't get fixed up by the franchisor. And then we're developing software and ideas on how to solve that and how to do it, and how do I teach people better, and then looking at how we recruit people better, how we can hold them better, what can we do to make it more attractive to them to stay with us, and just we're spending something like $5-6 million a year on software development right now, and I'm involved in that all the time. How can we actually use this to improve what we do, to make it more efficient? It's just obsessional. And again, this book by James Dyson called Invention is fantastic the same way. This is the guy that developed the cyclonic vacuum cleaner. That's one he's most famous for. But you can see it. You go into the dryers and you see these air blade dryers in public washrooms. He does those too. The thing about this guy is he had terrible struggles for a long time trying to get his inventions working. And then he got this cyclonic vacuum cleaner, which eventually took off after so many problems and issues. And he was almost broke for like a couple of decades. But what he has is an obsessional attitude towards improving what he does all the time. He just does model after model after model, never satisfied, never happy, always trying to improve it. He's now, multi-billionaire. He's the 4th richest man in the UK, I've heard. And I
Wow.
hugely admire him. I think he's a fantastic guy. I really, really admire James Dyson, and I have for years too.
Mm.
Um,
So the
it's
ongoing
improvement.
improvement.
Yeah. The problem people have is that they tend to. There's a lot of defensiveness about people. They want to think that what they do is good, and to be good, I think what you've got to do, look at yourself and say, what I do is bad, and it needs to improve.
Mm.
And so I seek out comments all the time. Any franchisee can write to me and they can complain about something about the system, and a lot of the time I don't listen because they're complaining that the system is too tough in terms of complaints and stuff. But often they have valid points too, and then we use that to improve what we do. Just as an example, last week we put out an appeal for, we put out an appeal last newsletter for people to come up with ways to improve Jim's Jobs, which is it's our program for franchisees to help them run their businesses more efficiently. And this one guy rang back. This is a 10-year veteran who's just started using it. This new program. And what I'd said is that if you can think of an idea that makes the system easier to use, not just an added feature, but easier to use, I'll give you a month's free fees. Well, this guy threw 7 ideas. He's got 7 months free fees.
Oh,
And I
wow.
said, look, I'd like you to talk to some of my parents about what you can do to help us with the design process. So this is a user, a highly experienced user who is, he's been with us more than 10 years, and he's just getting to grips with this program, and he's come up with all these great ideas about how to improve things, even little simple things like not putting not allowing for the possibility that you don't have GST, which some of our franchisees don't, not registered for GST. So, and there was a whole lot of other ideas, things that just would be simpler and easy to use. So that listening thing, everybody can tell me. I love books, and you probably recognize that too.
Yeah.
I listen or read probably 2 or 3 books a week. When I'm working on my farm or driving or exercising, I'm always listening to a talking book.
Yeah.
And I'm getting so many ideas all the time. How can I improve? How can I do this better? It's just boring. It's not all about business. A lot of it's about economics and public policy and biography, history, all kinds of things. But just always ideas. How can you improve? And that's the relentless desire to do better all the time. And the big difference in business I've found is not people who are good at what they do and people who are not good at what they do. The difference is between people who look at what they do and say, I'm so good. I'm not going to change because I'm doing the right thing. If anything goes wrong, it's your system. You're at fault.
Mm-hmm.
And it's people who say, how can I do it better? And it's interesting that some of the most amazing people in Jim's group, and we have some spectacular people I've learned so much from, like Sharon Connell, who runs our dog wash division, and Haydar Hussain, who runs clean divisions. Brilliant people. They're both really humble. They both listen all the time. And it's wonderful. I have a conversation with them. You're sparking ideas back and forth, and I'm learning from them and they're learning from me. And they'll listen to everybody and anything, and they always want to be better. That, to me, pride is one of the greatest enemies of business success. Really, people who are proud of what they do and they don't want to listen, and they don't want to be less than anyone else. They don't want to admit mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. You'd have to, because I'm such a fool. I make so many of them. But you've got to be prepared to look at yourself and say, I've done this wrong. Yeah, that was stupid. Once my wife was running our conference center, and I took it off her because I thought we could do a better job some other way. And it was a disaster. It was a terrible disaster. She used to get very mad at me, actually. She didn't like me doing it. And then eventually I said to her, okay, you were right, I was wrong. Please take it back. And also, not only that, but take over the running of this factory that's also running badly. And you took that and turned that one around. You see, you have to say, I'm wrong. I was wrong. I made a mistake.
So good, Jim. It's great to hear that from such a successful businessman like yourself, a leader, somebody who's in a position of influence and power, all those things. And you're looking to be humble, looking to improve, looking to serve your franchisees and customers better. I just think that's just absolutely fantastic. It's a great leadership lesson. I really appreciate hearing that from you. So my next question is more about your faith, and how does your Christian faith impact your business or impact what you do day to day?
Well, it's the absolute core of everything that we do, everything I've told you about, this whole thing about pride, this thing about using money properly, the thing about service to franchisees. And look, in a way, service to franchisees and to clients is it's a good business principle, which everybody should adopt, whether they're a Christian or not. But at the heart of it is it's an emotional, it's a moral issue. And even if it wasn't successful, I'd still want to do it. And that's the point too. Again, it comes back to, if you put money first, love of money is the source of all evil. And that's, Jesus was so much aware of that. Jesus was actually quite canny in the business sense. A lot of his stories are very sensible. I love the stories of the gospel. I love the stories about the workers and the one about the workers somebody who works the entire day and wants to get paid and describes that sort of situation and this. I love the way that Jesus spoke. I find Jesus a lot more easier to relate to than Paul, for example. Paul's an intellectual, and I'm not really intellectual. He's very abstract, and he doesn't do some great stuff. But to me, I'm a simple man. I'm like one of those Galilean peasants who listen to the concrete stories and the lilies of the field and stuff. That makes sense to me in a way. They speak to me. Some of these erudite intellectuals really over my head. I'm just not smart enough, I reckon.
That's fantastic.
So how does it affect? Well, look, as I said, the core values behind what Jim's group does and the way I run my business are fundamentally Christian. I'm not as good a Christian as I should be. I don't pray as much as I should and stuff. I go to church pretty regularly when I can, but we always say prayers before meals and things. But it's more something that guides your attitude towards life and to other people and to what your purpose is and what are we on earth for? To me, we're not on earth to just to enjoy ourselves. That is not what we're here. We have a purpose. God said, "You've got a job, Jim. You've got a job. This is what I want you to do." And the funny thing about it is, it's like in business. If you chase money first, in my experience, you're going to get a lot less money than if you actually look to what you want to achieve for yourself, for your customers, for your franchisees, employees, whatever. The same thing. Happiness is the same kind of thing too. If you go into life and you say, my primary goal is to be happy, one pretty good prediction is that you won't find much happiness by doing it. Because that is actually, if you ask someone like an alcoholic or a drug user, what is their main purpose in life? That is the most characteristic answer. I want to be happy. So I'm faced with not feeling very good. So what can make me good? Well, having a drink, shooting up on heroin, whatever, taking OxyContin, whatever you're doing. You're trying to be happy, but you're doing it in a way that goes contrary to the way that we're made. And you see, to me, God is the maker. And I always use the analogy that if you had a washing machine, let's say it's a Kelvinator. I don't know if they even make them anymore, but you had the Kelvinator washing machine and you want to fix it. Okay. Now, one thing you could do is you go out to your car and you get your manual to fix the car, which in my case is Mitsubishi. I haven't got a manual, but if I did, I get the and I take it and I try and fix the washing machine. Well, I think you could probably recognize it wouldn't work very well. Why not? Because it's not the maker's manual. Now, if I want to fix my washing machine, which I don't, because I'm mechanically hopeless, my wife actually tends to bang nails around their house more than me. She's a builder. But if I wanted to fix the washing machine, if I really had those skills, what I would do is I'd go to the Kelvinator company and get their manual. And I'd use that to fix my washing machine because it's the maker's manual. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So to me, the Bible is God's manual. He's the maker. He understands us. He understands how we operate. So if we actually say, well, I'm going to ignore the maker's manual and I'm going to do things my way, so I'm going to be happy. So therefore, I'm going to, eat a lot of food, or I'm going to, make a lot of money to make myself feel good and better than anyone else, so I can boast and be proud and shoot up on heroin. All of these kinds of stupid things people do to make themselves happy. You're not following the maker's manual. Yeah. Whereas if you actually look at the science, the research on happiness, like I said about money, what makes you happy? Not becoming more prestigious and sort of having a better house, a better car, because that's the zero-sum game. It's giving your money away. And the same thing with your life. What they've found is that what makes people happy is things like, for example, money has relatively little influence. When you get past about 75 grand a year, it doesn't matter a great deal how much money you have, but things that matter are good family life, good
Yeah.
relationships, spirit of the principles of the gospel. What does that do? That's about relationships with your family, with others. That's what makes you
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah.
Having a sense of purpose in your life, very strongly associated with happiness. And that
Mm.
means instead of just doing what you feel like doing, you think, what's the right thing to do?
Mm.
Like, for example, I'm really lazy and can easily veg out and want to, play computer games. And I have to tell myself, come on, Jim, you can't waste your life. So I've got to do something useful, like work on my book, for example, or on my research project, or one of those things that's good. And it's not what I want to do right now, but I know that's what it's part of God's purpose for my life. And that does make me a very happy man, because I
Yeah.
don't put happiness first. Just as I'm successful in business to the extent that I am, and that's probably exaggerated actually. I'm a lot more famous than I'm rich. But I'm successful in business, making money in business, because I don't put the money first. It's the same principle,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Fantastic. I love it. You mentioned that a lot about money today and not putting it first. And I can see, just even as you're talking, your purpose, your passion comes through, and it's so much more than just doing business or having money or just staying on the church and Christianity. We just did the census recently, and I think we're probably all tipping that Christianity is again going to go backwards as far as religion in our country, and church attendance is at an all-time low in Australia and in the Western world. What's your thoughts on where Christianity is at in Australia and how the church is going when it's in the marketplace, so to speak?
Yeah. What's interesting to me is that the churches that are most strongly embedded in the traditional principles of Christianity are the ones that tend to be doing the best. It's more
Mm,
your fundamentalists and your charismatics and people like that
mm,
are doing well, that have fairly tough line, that basically want you to live a life which is very different from the world. The ones that are saying, well, let's be as much like the world as possible, tend to be dropping like a stone. That's one
mm,
lesson you can draw from it. Um,
mm,
there's a change of character going on in our society, which is to do with wealth and urbanization. It's basically what people have always referred to as decadence. It's the same thing that destroyed the Roman Empire, and that basically wealthy urban elites through history have tended to go downhill and lose character. It's a change. Um, the decline of Christianity is part of that whole process. It's the loss of the values that support this kind of character that makes civilization. There's kind of the way, and this is again going back to biohistory. To me, Christianity is not only the truth, but it's actually what I call a cultural technology. It actually has a code of ethics and of behavior and of values, and things like chastity are a very important part of that. Also, stuff like fasting and Sabbath keeping and those kind of areas, which I
mm,
must sound terrible at. I work 7 days a week. I can't stop, but I know I shouldn't. But the point of it is, there's principles in Christianity and also in religions like Islam and Hinduism, Buddhism, and the rest, Confucian principles, that create a kind of character which is that disciplined, hardworking character, which is what's the basis of civilization. Civilization,
mm,
to me, reflects character. That's the
mm,
fundamental character of the individual, not the big impersonal forces, but the individual character.
mm,
What's happening is we're losing that. We're going downhill, and it's got to do with wealth and urbanization, and part and parcel of this decline of traditional cultural technologies like Christianity. Um, in my research project, I'm actually studying that and looking at it and working out with rats, in actual fact, how it happens and what you can do about it. And we're looking at the epigenetics of it and the microRNA and all the different things and the pheromones that are associated, and working out ways to reverse that. If we can do that, if we can produce a model that'll reverse this effect, and restore some of this character, it would take off very rapidly, because it would be an incredibly powerful way for individuals to achieve success. It would make people more productive. It would help people to be harder working, to be more disciplined, to be better employees, to be better entrepreneurs. It would have tremendous implications for treatment of things like alcoholism and drug addiction. It would help people to overcome those kinds of weaknesses. So I would think if we can develop effective treatments, that would actually they would spread like wildfire. It'd be multi-trillion-dollar industry if we could do it. And I think we will. The point about that is, and this is a long-winded way of saying about it, if you manage to reverse this process of decadence, what that will do is bring about a revival of Christianity. It will actually change our character, our personality in a way that makes us more receptive to the gospel. And I think that's what's likely to happen. Now, that not just Christianity, of course, but it will also help to revive Judaism, for example, and other kinds of such beliefs.
So are you just to help me understand, Jim? So you're kind of saying there, it sounds like your hypothesis is along the lines of character being, I suppose, the affairs of the human heart, have an impact on how civilizations work at a greater level, and maybe the rise and fall of civilizations is actually tied to the individual's character. Is it along those lines?
Basically, everything reflects character. The economy, politics reflects character. See, you go into somewhere like what's happened in Afghanistan recently, all right? Now, 20 years ago, when they were talking about invading Afghanistan, that was Iraq at that time, I was furious. I said, this is a terrible idea. Because what you're doing is you're looking at a nasty dictator and you're thinking, if I remove the dictator, I'll have a liberal democracy. And I said, no, that won't happen, because the government of Iraq and Afghanistan, for that matter, reflects the character of the people. They respond to a certain kind of very harsh authority. It's the nature of people like that. If you get rid of a violent and vicious dictator, you'll get either civil war or you'll get an even more vicious regime appearing, which is pretty well what happened with decades of civil war and also ISIS and everything else. I had a big argument with my oldest son, actually, who was very patriotic, which I admire, but he was really upset at me. And I said, no, this will be such a disaster. And the same thing with Afghanistan. You went in, get rid of Osama bin Laden, but then hand it over to the Northern Alliance. Don't try and run this country. You can't do it, because you can't impose a regime on people that haven't got the right character. Yeah. So everything that happens, people think it's political forces and economic forces and laws and all these institutions. No, character is the core of everything. And character is the bedrock. And what's happening in the West is we're losing this character that's the basis of democracy and so forth. It just happened recently with the election of Joe Biden. And I'm normally on the conservative side of politics, but I must say I thought Trump was a horrible man, and I'm glad he's gone. But the fact of the matter is, what's most alarming about this is that you had this mob invading Congress, and so many people actually approve of that. That, to me, is really frightening more than anything. And, the majority of Republican voters apparently feel that the election was stolen. They won't accept what was obviously a fair election. And that is really a concern. That is the same kind of change of character that happened in the late Roman Republic. When, for example, Sulla marched on Rome, the magistrates come out. Sulla was the first man to march with an army on Rome. The magistrates come out and they said, stop. And all but two of his legates refused to go with him. But the army went in and they took over the city, and he did all kinds of things which he thought was restoring the Republic, but killed a lot of people and stuff. Now, a few decades later, Caesar did the same thing, and all of his legates followed him, and then he became the dictator, and then that was the end of the Republic. Because when people's loyalties change from the impersonal principles of law and democratic institutions towards loyalty to a person, that is part of the process of decline. And and that's what drives it. It's not the ambition of individuals, because they'll take advantage. It's the attitude of ordinary people. Who do I follow? Do I follow the law? Do I follow the principles of democracy and of electoral colleges and this kind of system? Or do I follow the person that I want, that I believe in?
And why do you think there's such a rise at the moment in this I suppose this celebrity culture maybe in our civilization, this following people, this obsession with people like Trumps or political leaders. Even at the moment, I know it's very difficult living through COVID here in Victoria, but even this obsession that Daniel Andrews is either the hero and the savior or he's the villain and the devil. Like, I think people take these things so personally. But why do you think there is such an obsession with following a particular person rather than following maybe the enduring principles that you're talking about?
The character behind civilization, the kind of character, I call it high C, which is C for civilization, C for control, which is control of children, control of impulses and so forth. The nature of high C is that you have an impersonal relationship. Like you're related to the democratic systems, to the system of parliament, the system of elections, to rule by law. These are impersonal ideas. That's what causes civilizations to be great, like ours has been. When you have this process of decadence, your loyalties become more personal. They become loyalties to an individual. So it's a fundamental change of character in ordinary men and women. That's what's driving this thing. And that's fundamentally what it is. It's not the great people themselves. It's the people who you choose to follow. So, for example, one of the things that interests me very much is periods of chaos, like the Wars of the Roses in England in the 1450s, or the late 15th century, or the warlord era in China. You understand what's going on there. Now, people always study the leaders. They say the great forces are the great leaders are they're greedy for power, and that causes all these problems. But that's not the reason at all. You look at a case like the Battle of Bosworth Field, where Henry the Seventh, or who became Henry the Seventh, defeated Richard III. What caused that battle to happen, to get decided by it was a guy called Lord Stanley, who was married to Henry's mother, and they never had any children. But it was, and he was known as being iffy as to which side he'd go on. In actual fact, Richard the King had his son as a hostage, and he said, "If you don't join my side, I'll kill your son."
Wow.
And in the end, Stanley decided to join Henry, and that's what made the battle. That's what decided the battle. And Richard was killed, and that's the beginning of the Tudors. And the beginning, actually, Henry had a remarkably weak right to the throne. I mean, who would have thought that this massive Tudor dynasty would come out of that? This really feeble, pathetic claim. It was weaker than almost anybody else. There must have been about 20 people had better rights to the throne than he did. But he won. And he won because Lord Stanley changed his mind. And the point of it is, nobody at any side suggested that any of Stanley's men would care about anything except what Stanley wanted. They just followed him. So that's why that attitude that says I am loyal to a person is what caused that chaos to happen. As soon as you get people, and the same thing with the Earl of Warwick, for example, who was the one that backed the Yorkists and got Edward IV on the throne. That was Richard's brother. York backed him, and then Warwick backed him and helped him to get the throne. He was a really powerful, the biggest landowner in England, and then he changed his mind because he wasn't getting what he wanted. So he decided to back the Lancastrian king that he just deposed, and he put him back on the throne. And Edward fled, and then Edward came back, and then Warwick was killed and so forth. But again, it was the fact that he could change sides like that, and everybody would have followed him. And there's a wonderful story about the warlord era in China called Warlord Politics by a guy called Pai, which talks about the attitudes of the people during the warlord era in China, which was like in the 1920s. And it's the same thing that arose. The actual loyalties of the soldiers were all towards their personal commander. And that person was therefore the warlord. And that was why the system was so chaotic. And there's a difference actually, if you look at the propaganda of the different parties in that period, like there's the warlord propaganda, all to do with loyalty and Confucian values and stuff like that. And then you have a look at the communists, and they're very emotional and very much in favour of the larger cause, much more impersonal. And the nationalists were in between. So you can actually look at the character of the people who were in those particular groups, and they were quite different. And so this is what, to me, everything like politics is like some froth on the surface of the sea. and the waves going up and down. You think, well, the froth's what? No, it's not. The waves themselves are driving it. The froth's just on the surface,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
a boat that rises and falls with the waves. It's not the boat that's doing it. It's the waves that you've got to look at. The waves are the people, the character of the individuals, and everything in our society, everything we understand about economic development and everything else depends on the character of individual people, which is a very Christian idea if you think about it. You know,
It is. It is.
we don't believe as Christians in personal forces. No, we believe in the individual spirit, and the
Yeah.
individual character as being what matters. That's what the Bible is about.
Yes. Yes. I was just about to say that. It's a very Christian idea. It's exactly what I was thinking, because it is about the affairs of the human heart, and that's what we believe as Christians. That God goes beyond politics, beyond these outer things, and really starts with the individual in the human heart. So and it's great to hear a bit of your expertise on history here. I understand that your PhD is in history, and I love history, absolutely love it. I love the intersection of history and things like Christianity and all these kind of things. What do you see in this?
I must say, not just about history. The part of the book that I've been thoroughly working on lately is all about lemmings and cycles of population cycles of lemmings, which is very relevant to human history. So it's the biology of history that I'm concerned about.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
And what do you? I was going to ask along those lines. What do you think the future looks like for Western civilization? Like, what do you have any thoughts there?
Well, on our present course, very bad. We're in a process of classic civilization decline. We're pretty much like the Roman Republic was, beginning of the first century BC, when people like Sulla were just on the horizon. We're in a classic process of decline. It will probably be faster than what happened there, because we're so much wealthier. I mean, people in the late Roman Republic would riot because bread was too dear and they were hungry. The biggest problem we have now is obesity. And so the plentiful food is what drives this process, as well as the loss of these traditional values. So we're headed in a really, really, really bad direction. But I believe that we can change this. And the thing that gives me the greatest confidence is the incredible advances in biotechnology over the previous decade, especially. Things like the development of the human genome and the ability to actually make changes. People are very concerned about the genetic changes that can be made to the genome. The biggest excitement to me is in the epigenetic changes. The changes is the way that, I don't know if you understand epigenetics, but basically your genetic code is like a template. And what happens is that genes, which are just elements of DNA, actually what they do is they spit out a protein, which is often something like a microRNA, like a messenger that does certain things. Okay, now that's fixed by heredity. That's fixed. Okay, you can't change it except by random genetic mutation, which takes a long time, and we are working out ways to change it otherwise in a directed sort of way. But what happens to these things is these little genes have little things like taps that can turn off, like what's called a methyl group or a histone, something like that. So you can turn them off or turns them on. So and that causes dramatic changes in all kinds of things, like character in particular, but also health, also to do with, I'm sure most forms of mental illness, all kinds of things are all to do with epigenetics. It's upon the gene, and it's what they're doing with systems like understanding these microRNAs and so forth, is working out how to target particular genes and turn them on or off. That is an amazing technology. But what it means is theoretically, you could go to somebody who was hopeless drug addict, hopelessly demoralized, and you could give them an injection, and with their consent. By the way, I'm not talking about any social engineering. I'm just talking about a medical treatment. And they have this injection, and they get a bit of reorientation and stuff, and they go home and they live an incredibly productive, happy life, and they don't want drugs anymore. And people who are hopeless gamblers, people who are violent, people who are philanderers and so forth, all kinds of, to my mind, character flaws. If people want to, they can actually just have them wiped out completely. And poverty itself, you can change people's character in a way that makes them want to work hard and want to get ahead and be better family members and better parents and so forth. And you could change anything, and you could just by asking them what they want to be. And people want to be living successful, productive lives. So if we develop this technology, and I'm very optimistic we will in the next 2 or 3 years even, then it'll spread like wildfire, and it'll have dramatic effect on the future. It'll change the whole history of the human race in a way that's unimaginable beyond anything we could possibly imagine. And you're talking about development of relief of poverty in the third world. I mean, it could happen in a generation. The whole world could be prosperous. You talk about greenhouse gases and so forth, and how we can control global warming, which I think is a real threat. Technology is the key to that. But what if you had people who are really amazingly good at technology, so many of them? Suddenly we'd have so much energy, we wouldn't need to burn fossil fuels. We could suck them out of the atmosphere to make fuel with. You could do amazing things with the right technology. And all that depends on having the right people with the right attitudes and the right character. So we're in a terrible state right now. We're heading in a very, very bad direction. But I think we can change it. I think we can reverse it. And I believe that's what will happen.
Amazing. It's amazing. Some of the stuff's a little bit over my head. I did try to do my research before coming into this podcast, but it's definitely a new area for me.
I make it out that I understand more than I do. I'm not a biological scientist. I can talk about methyl groups and histones and stuff and microRNA, and I vaguely understand what they're about. But I have a research team that I talk to every 2 weeks on a Friday morning. We have a hookup, and I've got these things going, and I ask them, and they're the experts, not me. I just provide the money, but anyway.
I think it's fascinating though, mate, and I think what you're touching on there, it sounds phenomenal. And what I do understand is definitely at that, as a pastor, is that level of character, the level of the human heart, and totally agree with you. That's where things need to be happening. That's where society has its best chance. It comes back to that Solzhenitsyn idea, doesn't it, of the moral radar running through every human heart, and that's where right or wrong really begins. And what do you, maybe our final question, just to get back to the stuff about our culture and affluence, where do you really see affluence corrupting people? Because for me, that is something that I often think about. You mentioned earlier about the comments even in the Bible about wealth. I am very aware of my own affluence and the incredible blessing that I have in this country, even to live through a pandemic and still have money and a home and security. And but where do you see affluence really causing a problem? Why does it affect people's character so much?
It gets back to the biology, and the basis of the idea behind biohistory is that this character we're talking about, which is what makes civilization. There's things like strong monogamous family bonds and hard work and enterprise and democracy and stuff. Basically, it's a biological. It's the use of a biological system that was originally evolved, and I'm an evolutionist, to adapt animals to limited food supply. So, for example, if you talk about someone like a gibbon, for example, which is an animal that lives it's an ape that lives in the forests of Southeast Asia, they actually have a family structure which is very similar to that of humans in Western society. They are strictly monogamous. They have territories like we have our houses with our quarter-acre blocks and so forth. Spend a lot of time on their children. They're very hardworking. They're always going around trying to find different food to eat. They defend their territories very rigorously. They don't have sexual relations until they're actually in a strong pair bond. So they're actually very much like a traditional Christian family ideal. They're adapted to an environment where food is chronically limited. And it's very different from an animal like a baboon, for example, that lives in the savannah of Africa, and where they have promiscuous mating systems, for example, and large bonds of people and so forth. And that's more adapted to an environment where food is generally plentiful, but sometimes really, really short, and they starve. So what happens is when you have an animal that is in a situation where food becomes relatively short, they shift towards this food restricted type of behavior. It's a biochemical reaction. It does things like, for example, it drops the levels of testosterone and leptin, as an example. And it does certain other things too. We're looking at the physiology, and it changes the way the amygdala functions, which is part of the midbrain, and those kinds of areas. So it's a biological reaction to food shortage. Now, what actually makes civilization is that we've hijacked this mechanism, and this is where the principles of religions, these cultural technologies come about. They actually work out ways of making them artificially great so that people act as if they're hungry even when they aren't. And a perfect example of that is chastity. The idea that you shouldn't have sex with anybody until you're married to them. There've been done experiments on rats, for example, which found that if you have a rat that's given access to a female around the age of puberty, their actual character is extremely different in later life. They're much higher levels of testosterone, which in humans is associated with things like crime and unemployment and all kinds of things, drug addiction, all high testosterone kind of things. So by having a rat, by not allowing it to have sex with another rat at that crucial age in adolescence, it actually changes their character. Now, interesting is Alfred Kinsey, you've probably heard of. He did studies, major studies on sexual behavior in the human and male and female back in the late 40s, early 50s. His whole thesis was actually all about how sex is great and we should do more and more of it. And he was a great apostle for that. But the interesting thing is when you have a look at his studies themselves, at the statistics, ignore the gloss he put on it, he had some really interesting findings. And one of the things that you can get from this, which I quote in Biohistory, is that one of the best indicators of how well successful a man is going to be in life, in education and in income, is how many what proportion of his sexual outlet in adolescent years is nocturnal emissions. The more nocturnal emissions he has, the more likely he is to be successful. Because what matters is that if you restrict sexual activity at a very young age, you create this character, this disciplined, hardworking, enterprising kind of character, which is what's really, really good for being successful in our modern world. So this is where it all amounts to. And wealth is the same sort of thing. I mean, one of the things that I'm very focused on is health. Now, that's just not for its own sake, but it's also a matter of character. Fasting is very good for you. So, for example, at the moment, I'm quite hungry because I don't eat breakfast. I won't eat anything for about 16, 17 hours a day. So it's good for your health, but it's also good for your character. It just creates this kind of what I call a high C character, which is this disciplined sort of character. That's why fasting has been so much part of traditional Christianity. And I think we miss out on that too.
Yes, for sure. And how do you reconcile your beliefs in Christianity with evolution, as you mentioned before, being an evolutionist? Talk to me about that. That's interesting.
Well, I believe that God created everything. I believe that God is the creator. He's the creator. He's the designer. The only difference I have, and I actually go to a fundamentalist church. I sat to a whole sermon a couple of months back about evolution and how it's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, I believe God is the designer. Where I disagree with the fundamentalists, you might say, is exactly when it happened. They would say 6,500 years. I'd say, well, about 13.7 billion. And that's for this universe. So I don't have any problems with it. I mean, the Pope is an evolutionist. I think he's a good man. So,
so you
I
believe
understand.
in God.
I seriously understand. And one reason we go to an creationist church is because they are more hardline on fundamental moral issues. And the problem with if you start unpicking the Bible and you say, well, let's discard Genesis, then you say, well, let's discard teachings about chastity or about homosexuality, all kinds of things like that. So it's a very dangerous thing. It's like the loose leaf Bible idea. You know, you can just take out sections that you don't agree with and leave the ones in that you do. And once you do that, you actually are not following the Maker's Manual, are you? You actually, and sex is a perfect example. Hey, yeah, let's all be free and sex is all great and stuff. Well, no, it isn't, because it has effects on character, especially when you're young, especially in those crucial years of late adolescence, early adulthood. So I understand why they do it and appreciate it, but to me it's impossible to believe, because the evidence is too overwhelmingly powerful that evolution is a brilliant theory.
Great.
But it's,
That's really interesting.
God
It's
made
really
it.
interesting.
God made it. God did it. That's where I fundamentalist. That's why I'd rather go to a fundamentalist church, even if they have rather strange beliefs in my terms about history,
Yeah.
compared with one that's more liberal that tends to say, "Hey, what's the world thinking? Let's follow them."
Yeah, yeah. I think you've got a great ability, Jim, to hold different ideas and to hold things well. And but then I love the fact that you're a straight shooter. You're happy to share what you think. And I've really enjoyed the podcast today. We've covered a phenomenal amount of ground from the history of Jim's mowing and Jim's group and your faith and your business and your history, biohistory, character. Civilization's just been a really wild ride, mate. And I just want to say big thank you for making the time to come on and share with us some of your insights, some of your stories. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's great. It's great to talk about things from a Christian perspective. I don't get enough of an opportunity. These things come out not as strong as I like, and I think what I can present to you is a lot closer to what really is going on than some people can
Fantastic.
get.
Well, we should talk again, mate. I'd love to. Anything about God and Christianity and how it intersects, especially with culture, business, all these things is really a passion of mine. So sounds like you're similar, which is great. Thank you very much.
I trust you were impacted by that Leadership Lessons podcast. I would love to hear your thoughts about today's podcast. Please comment down below and please review the podcast and share it with a friend. Doing this inspires us and helps others to find the podcast. See you next time.